Welcome. You're standing on a ferry crossing San Francisco Bay in 1934, and you're looking at the most feared destination in the American prison system. Alcatraz Island rises from the water a mile and a half offshore. Cold, gray, isolated. This is not just a prison. This is where the federal government sends people it wants to disappear. Not to execute, not to torture, but to erase from public consciousness while keeping them technically alive. The island is 12 acres of rock in the middle of treacherous currents, surrounded by water so cold it kills. The Golden Gate Bridge doesn't exist yet. San Francisco spreads across the hills behind you, close enough to see, impossibly far to reach. This is the point. Alcatraz is designed to be visible from the city, a reminder. This is what happens when you push too far. The island tells you everything about its purpose before you even step on the dock. There's no beach, just rock and concrete dropping straight into the bay. The water is 50 to 55 degrees year-round. The currents move at 6 knots during tidal changes. People have asked whether anyone could swim from Alcatraz to San Francisco. The answer is yes, but the real answer is more complicated. The distance is swimmable. The cold is what kills you. Hypothermia sets in within minutes. Your muscles stop responding. Your mind stops working. The current pulls you toward the Golden Gate, out to the Pacific. Even if you're a strong swimmer, even if you time it perfectly, you're fighting conditions designed by nature to be lethal. The island sits in the middle of this on purpose. When the federal government chose Alcatraz in 1934, they weren't looking for the most secure building. They were looking for the most isolating location. The history of the island stretches back before the prison. The Spanish named it Isla de los Alcatraces, Island of the Pelicans, in the 1770s. The birds covered the rock. Nothing else lived here. No fresh water, no soil worth mentioning, just guano and granite and wind. In 1850, when California became a state, the U.S. Army saw the strategic value. A fortress in the middle of the bay could defend against naval attack. They built fortifications. They installed cannons. They established a military garrison. During the Civil War, Alcatraz held Confederate sympathizers, not because it was a good prison, but because it was isolated. By the 1860s, it was already a military prison. Deserters, soldiers convicted of crimes, military prisoners from the Indian Wars. The Army kept people here who couldn't be kept anywhere else. The pattern was already established. Isolation as punishment, distance as security. By the early 1900s, the military prison was permanent. Alcatraz held prisoners from the Philippine-American War, from military conflicts across the Pacific. The buildings were deteriorating. The cells were crude, but the location remained perfect. When the Army finally gave up the island in 1933, the Justice Department saw opportunity. The federal prison system needed a solution. Prohibition had created a new kind of criminal. Organized crime figures with money, connections, lawyers, public relations. They corrupted local prisons. They bribed guards. They lived comfortably behind bars while running their operations from inside. Traditional prisons couldn't hold them, not because the walls were weak, but because the walls were permeable. Money flowed in and out, messages traveled, power remained. The Attorney General, Homer Cummings, wanted a prison where none of that was possible. Not a place for rehabilitation, not a place for reform, a place for removal. The most dangerous, most disruptive, most incorrigible federal prisoners would go to Alcatraz. Not for long sentences necessarily, but for the duration of their need to be disappeared. The island would be a prison within the prison system. You didn't get sent to Alcatraz for your crime. You got sent to Alcatraz for your behavior after the crime, for being too much trouble, for refusing to be contained, for making other prisons unmanageable. Alcatraz was where the system sent its failures. James A. Johnston became the first warden in 1934. He was 60 years old, a veteran of prison administration, known for attempting progressive reforms at Folsom and San Quentin. But Alcatraz wasn't about reform. Johnston understood the assignment: maximum security, minimum privilege, total control. He transformed the old military prison into something unprecedented in the American system. Every detail was considered, every weakness eliminated. The island became a machine for human storage. The cell house sits at the island's peak, a three-story reinforced concrete structure built on the footprint of the old military prison. From the outside, it's industrial, almost bureaucratic. No Gothic towers, no architectural drama, just a long rectangular building with barred windows and a utility-grade facade. This is intentional. Alcatraz doesn't need to look frightening. The fear is in the location, not the architecture. Inside, the design is ruthlessly efficient. 4 main cell blocks labeled A, B, C, and D. Block A is mostly unused, a storage area. Blocks B and C contain the general population cells. Block D is isolation and disciplinary cells. Between B and C runs Broadway, the main corridor so named by inmates with bitter humor because it's the closest they'll get to the famous street. Each cell in the general population is identical, 9 feet by 5 feet, about the size of an average bathroom. A cot, a fold-down desk, a shelf, a toilet with no seat, a sink. The walls are concrete. The front is steel bars. The door slides on a track, operated by a lever system that can open or close all the cells in a tier simultaneously. Everything is painted pale green or gray. No decoration is allowed. No personalization beyond a few books, writing materials, approved photographs. The cells have no windows. Light comes from the corridor. Air comes from the corridor. Privacy doesn't exist. Guards walk past constantly. Other prisoners are 3 feet away across the corridor. You can hear everything. Toilets flushing, men snoring, men crying, conversations, silence. The acoustic reality of Alcatraz is that you're never alone, but you're always isolated. You're surrounded by hundreds of other prisoners, but you can't build community. The rules prevent it. The rules at Alcatraz are unlike those at any other federal prison. Silence is enforced during meals, during work, during cell time. You can speak during recreation yard time only. Privileges that are standard elsewhere, like newspapers, radio, visits, packages, are severely restricted or earned through months of compliance. You get 4 visits per month, and visitors must be immediate family, approved in advance, subject to cancellation for any disciplinary infraction. You can write and receive 1 letter per week. All correspondence is read, censored, sometimes denied. No outside news unless approved. No magazines. No contact with former associates. You are cut off. That's the point. Work is mandatory. Most prisoners work in the prison industry's building, doing laundry for military installations, assembling products, maintaining the prison itself. This isn't rehabilitation, it's control. Idle prisoners are dangerous prisoners. Work fills time, it exhausts the body, it creates routine. The routine is everything. Wake at 6:30, count. Breakfast in the dining hall, count. Work detail, count. Lunch, count. Work, count. Dinner, count. Recreation yard or return to cells, count. Lights out at 9:30, count. The guards count constantly, 5, 6, 7 times a day, sometimes more. The counting is psychological. You are not a name, you are a number, you are inventory. The dining hall tells you what Alcatraz thinks of its prisoners. It's large, clean, almost pleasant by prison standards. Tables seat 4. The food is good, sometimes very good, better than most prisons. This confuses people. Why feed dangerous criminals well? The answer is practical. Food is one of the few things prisoners care about. Food riots have destroyed prisons. If the food is good, that's one less reason to rebel. The Bureau of Prisons learned this early. Good food is cheaper than constant unrest. But even here, control is absolute. You enter single file. You sit where assigned. You eat in silence. You have 20 minutes. Utensils are counted before and after every meal. A missing fork can shut down the entire prison. Guards with rifles watch from elevated positions. Tear gas canisters are embedded in the ceiling, ready to deploy if anything happens. The dining hall looks normal until you notice the rifles, the gas, the counting, the silence. Then you understand, even feeding you is a security operation. The typical prisoner at Alcatraz arrives after causing problems elsewhere. Al Capone arrived in 1934 from Atlanta, where he'd been living comfortably, bribing guards, receiving special treatment. At Alcatraz, he was prisoner 85. No special treatment, no privileges, no power. He served 4.5 years on the island, most of it uneventfully. The system worked on him. Isolation broke what prison couldn't. Robert Stroud, the so-called Birdman of Alcatraz, arrived in 1942. His reputation was built at Leavenworth, where he'd spent decades studying birds. At Alcatraz, there were no birds. He spent 17 years in isolation, most of it in D-Block. The man the public imagined, gentle and scholarly, surrounded by canaries, was a fiction created later by a book and a movie. The real Stroud was violent, difficult, impossible to manage in general population. Alcatraz disappeared him efficiently. George Machine Gun Kelly arrived in 1934. The name was media invention, but the government used him anyway. A celebrity criminal sent to the celebrity prison. He served 17 years, almost entirely without incident. The island reduced him to routine. But most prisoners at Alcatraz weren't famous. They were bank robbers, kidnappers, escape artists, men who'd assaulted guards, killed other inmates, organized rebellions. The average prisoner was serving 20 to 30 years federal time. They might spend 2 to 5 years at Alcatraz, then transfer back to another prison once they'd proven compliant. Alcatraz was a tool. You went there to be broken of whatever made you unmanageable. Then you went back to the regular system. The island's population fluctuated between 260 and 300 prisoners. This was deliberate. Overcrowding creates chaos. Space allows control. The ratio of guards to prisoners was higher than anywhere else in the system. 1 guard for every 3 prisoners. Everywhere else ran 1 to 12 or worse. At Alcatraz, you were always watched. The guards lived on the island with their families. Apartments occupied the lower levels of the main building and separate residential structures. Children grew up here. They attended school on the island through 8th grade, then took the ferry to the city. They played in the small recreation areas. They knew the prisoners by sight, though contact was forbidden. The families shopped at the island store, attended social events, lived a strange middle-class existence on top of a maximum security prison. For them, Alcatraz was home. The cognitive dissonance was remarkable. Children playing 50 feet from men locked in cages. Wives hanging laundry within view of D-Block. Birthday parties in apartments above cell blocks. The normalcy was intentional. Happy guards are stable guards. The government made Alcatraz livable for the staff precisely because it was unlivable for the prisoners. Isolation wasn't just geographic. It was social, psychological, temporal. You lost contact with the outside world. News filtered in slowly, censored, often weeks old. You didn't know what was happening in your neighborhood, your city, the country. The war came and went. Most Alcatraz prisoners during World War II barely knew it was happening. They couldn't serve. They couldn't contribute. They just continued the routine while the world transformed around them. After the war, the world had moved on. The criminals they'd been were obsolete. Prohibition was ancient history. Organized crime had evolved. The men who came out of Alcatraz found themselves in a country that no longer remembered them. This was the ultimate punishment. Not death, not torture, irrelevance. The escape attempts are what people remember. Alcatraz had 14 separate escape attempts involving 36 men over 29 years. Most failed immediately. 2 men drowned. 5 were shot and killed. The rest were recaptured on the island or in the bay. The most famous escape, June 11, 1962, involved Frank Morris and John and Clarence Anglin. They dug through deteriorating concrete with sharpened spoons over months. They built dummy heads from soap, toilet paper, and real hair stolen from the barbershop. They placed the dummies in their beds, fooling the evening count. They climbed through the ventilation system to the roof, made it down to the water, and disappeared on a raft made from raincoats. They were never found. The FBI concluded they drowned. The evidence suggested death by hypothermia within hours. But the bodies never surfaced, and the case was never officially closed. Whether they died or escaped, the system treats it as failure. But the real story isn't whether they made it. The real story is what it took to try. Months of obsessive planning, incredible risk, the willingness to die trying, the desperation required to dig through concrete with a spoon. The escapes became legend because they suggested Alcatraz could be beaten. The government couldn't allow that narrative. After 1962, security tightened further, but the prison was already dying. The cost was unsustainable. Alcatraz was the most expensive prison in the federal system, 3 times the cost per prisoner of other maximum security prisons. The salt air corroded everything. Maintenance was constant and expensive. Fresh water had to be brought from the mainland by barge. Electricity, supplies, personnel, everything cost more because of the location. By the early 1960s, newer maximum security prisons on the mainland could do what Alcatraz did for far less money. The island had become obsolete. On March 21, 1963, Alcatraz closed. The last 27 prisoners transferred to other institutions. The staff left. The buildings were locked. The island sat empty. For 6 years, it was abandoned, deteriorating in the salt wind. Windows broke. Pipes froze and burst. Graffiti appeared. Squatters came and went. The government didn't know what to do with it. Proposals included a monument to the United Nations, a shopping complex, a casino. All failed. The island was too expensive to maintain, too controversial to develop, too famous to ignore. In November 1969, Native American activists occupied Alcatraz, claiming it under treaty rights. The occupation lasted 19 months. They wanted the island as a center for Native American studies, a cultural institution. The government wanted them gone but couldn't remove them without creating martyrs. The standoff was patient. The government cut off water and electricity. Fires broke out, some accidental, some not. The warden's house burned. The lighthouse keeper's residence burned. The occupiers dwindled. By June 1971, federal marshals removed the last 15 people without violence. The occupation failed in its immediate goals but succeeded in changing the national conversation about Native American rights. Alcatraz became a symbol again, but this time of resistance, not control. In 1972, Alcatraz became part of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. By 1973, it opened to tourists. The transformation was rapid and surreal. The most feared prison in America became a destination. People paid to visit. They wanted to see where Capone lived, where the escape happened, where the violence occurred. The National Park Service stabilized the buildings but left them largely as they were. Cells remained furnished. Graffiti from the occupation remained. The decay remained. This was intentional. Alcatraz as ruin is more powerful than Alcatraz restored. The crumbling concrete tells the story better than any renovation could. Today, more than 1 million people visit Alcatraz every year. They take ferries from Fisherman's Wharf. They walk the same paths the prisoners walked. They stand in the cells. They take photographs. The audio tour is narrated by former guards and former prisoners. Their voices describe the routine, the rules, the isolation. The experience is packaged, sanitized, made safe for families. Children run through the cell house. Couples pose for pictures in front of cells. The gift shop sells books about escapes, biographies of gangsters, postcards, magnets. Alcatraz is consumed as entertainment, as history, as a story with a clear beginning and end. But something is missing in this consumption. The tourists see the cells and think they understand. They don't. You cannot understand what isolation does to a mind by visiting for 2 hours. You cannot comprehend years of routine, of silence, of counted time, of being surrounded by people while being utterly alone. The cell is 9 by 5. That's measurable. The psychological compression isn't. The tourists photograph the Golden Gate Bridge from the island and marvel at how close it looks. They're told about the cold water, the currents, the impossibility of escape. They nod. They take more pictures. They leave. They return to their lives. This is the final victory of Alcatraz. It has become a symbol so powerful that the symbol has replaced the reality. The reality was simpler and more brutal. Alcatraz was a machine for removing people from society without killing them. It was efficient, it was expensive, it was deliberate. The government chose an island because islands are natural prisons. They built a system that minimized human contact while maximizing human observation. They created rules that prevented community while enforcing compliance. They used isolation as a weapon more effective than violence. The prisoners at Alcatraz weren't beaten regularly. They weren't starved. They weren't tortured in the traditional sense. They were disappeared, removed from the world, placed somewhere they could see the city but never reach it, given routine without meaning, time without purpose. The cruelty was in the precision. When Alcatraz closed, the Bureau of Prisons learned from it. Supermax prisons today use the same principles: isolation, control, routine, the removal of human contact as punishment. ADX Florence in Colorado is Alcatraz refined, built into a mountain instead of placed on an island, but the concept is identical. Remove the most dangerous prisoners from the general population. Control them absolutely. Minimize cost. Maximize security. The physical location changes. The principle doesn't. Alcatraz was the prototype. The guards who worked there had complicated relationships with the place. Some saw it as necessary. These men were dangerous. Society needed protection. The isolation was justified. Others saw it as corrosive. Years of watching men in cages, counting them like inventory, enforcing silence, removing dignity in the name of security. The guards lived with their families on the island. They couldn't escape it. Their children grew up in the shadow of cell blocks. The prison was their workplace and their home. The psychological cost to the staff is rarely discussed. They weren't imprisoned, but they weren't free either. They were bound to the island by employment, by housing, by routine. Some stayed for years. Some couldn't leave fast enough. All of them carried it with them. The prisoners who survived Alcatraz and returned to society faced a world that had moved on. Their crimes were old news. Their associates were dead, imprisoned elsewhere, or had moved on. The skills they'd had were obsolete. The neighborhoods they knew had changed. They'd lost years to isolation, and those years couldn't be recovered. Some readjusted, some couldn't. The recidivism rate for Alcatraz prisoners was never officially calculated, but anecdotal evidence suggests many couldn't function outside. The isolation that was meant to control them had broken something necessary for social existence. They'd been removed too completely. The question Alcatraz raises is what society does with people it fears. Execution is one answer. Exile is another. Alcatraz was a third option. Imprisonment so complete it resembled death. The prisoners were alive, but they ceased to participate in the world. They were maintained, counted, controlled, and forgotten. The system worked. Alcatraz didn't have riots. It didn't have the violence of other prisons. The isolation prevented organization. The routine prevented rebellion. The control was nearly absolute. But the cost, economic and human, was unsustainable. The island closed because cheaper methods became available, not because the philosophy changed. Walk through Alcatraz today at sunset, and you see tourists hurrying to catch the last ferry. The light turns golden, the bay glows. The city across the water lights up. The island empties. The rangers lock the gates. The cell house goes dark. The birds, pelicans, and gulls reclaim the rock. The wind moves through broken windows. The place is silent in a way it never was when it was operational. The silence now is natural. The silence then was enforced. This is the difference. Nature is indifferent. The prison was intentional. Every moment of silence, every restriction, every rule, every count was a choice. Humans built this. Humans ran this. Humans survived this. The rock was just the location. The prison was the system. Alcatraz, in its 29 years as a federal prison, held 1,176 men. Some famous, most forgotten. They came from other prisons. Most returned to other prisons. Some died on the island, from illness, from violence, from suicide. Their time there varied, months to decades. What they shared was the experience of removal, of being placed somewhere designed to make them disappear while keeping them alive. The island did what it was supposed to do. It isolated, it controlled, it broke resistance, it demonstrated federal power, it warned others, it removed problems. And when it became too expensive, it was closed, repurposed, and turned into a tourist attraction where people pay to experience a sanitized version of systematic human isolation. This is Alcatraz, not the legend, not the escapes, not the gangsters, but the machine. A 12-acre rock in San Francisco Bay that the federal government turned into a tool for making people vanish without killing them. Within 15 years of closing, it had become nostalgia. Within 30 years, it was a theme park. The transformation was complete. The system that created it, refined it, and eventually abandoned it continues in other forms, other locations, other prisons built on the same principles. But Alcatraz remains unique, an island, a symbol, a place where isolation was geography, architecture, policy, and punishment all at once. The ferry returns to the city, the tourists disembark. They've seen the cells, heard the stories, taken the pictures. They return to their lives. The island remains empty now, a monument to a specific kind of cruelty, the kind that doesn't need whips or chains, just distance, just rules, just routine, just time, just the systematic removal of everything that makes a person part of the world while keeping the body technically alive. That was Alcatraz. That is what it was built to do. And for 29 years, it did it perfectly.